Joe, running for his life in the middle of the bush, is being followed by a mysterious figure. Sadly, Joe stumbles and falls, which lets the beast get a hold of him. It's a vampire, and he begins consuming Joe's blood right away. As the sun rises, the vampire perishes and dissolves to ash, but Joe also burns his hand, turning him into the vampire. He moves first, hiding in the shadows of the trees, until he comes upon a pile of logs. He then wraps himself in the log's blanket and flees into a nearby shed for safety. As soon as the transition is complete, he pukes there. Stan, in the meantime, wakes up in his gorgeous house and enjoys breakfast with his folks. All of a sudden, there is a glass falling, his mother looks really ill, and the home is in disarray. Subsequently, in front of his kid, his father pulls a gun and commits suicide. Stan wakes up at that point and realizes his real residence isn't in good shape. His grandfather Ellis, a former soldier who often yells at him and demands to be addressed as Sir, is his caregiver after his parents have passed away. Ellis throws Stan against the wall as a threat while whining about today's youth if Stan even tries to ignore him. It is revealed that Ellis owns the shed as Stan heads off to school. The gang that bullies Stan at school drives by while he is riding his bicycle, driving like crazy in an attempt to knock him down. Stan avoids him, but the diversion sends him crashing into a police vehicle. The deputy is enraged and tells Sheriff Dorney that he will soon turn 18, but Sheriff Dorney is quite understanding. This implies that he will be able to apprehend Stan permanently and that there won't be any more juvie or second chances. Stan's closest friend Dahmer criticizes the gang at school after overhearing them speak poorly about him. Marble, Pitt, and Ozzy get angry at this, and before long they are pushing one another across the corridor. Stan and Roxy rush to his aid, and Stan nearly initiates a brawl until a teacher intervenes and sends them back to their schools. Dahmer claims after class that he will eventually lose it and kill the gang because he is sick of being like this. Additionally, he bemoans the fact that Roxy, who was formerly a member of their friend group, now chooses to hang out with the popular kids. Stan is still unable to get over his crush, though. Later, when Stan gets home, he plays with his knife and hides in the attic to gaze at images of his parents while listening to emo music. He throws the knife exactly toward a target after cutting to forget. Then Ellis tells him to cut the grass. Stan walks outside and hears the dog barking at the shed, but he ignores it because he doesn't think it's a warning and goes inside. On the table, he discovers some teeth while searching for the lawnmower. Joe emerges from hiding at that precise moment and tries to attack Stan, which leads to Stan unintentionally opening the window. Stan hurries out of the shed to retrieve the dog, fearing he's just seen a crackhead, but the scorching heat keeps Joe at bay. Joe ignores Stan's calls for him to come out, so Stan sends the dog after him. The dog barked and made loud noises as soon as it entered the shed, and then it threw its head out. Ellis arrives to chastise a scared Stan as he rushes inside to get a knife, so Stan tells him about the dog and the intruder. Ellis disregards Stan's advice to call the police and rushes after the assailant, asking the dog to confirm his presence. After giving Stan his cane in shock at the sight of his dead dog, the old guy enters the shed with a wood stick and prepares to murder. After a few minutes of quiet, Ellis declares that everything is gone but the dog's body before bursting into screams. The sounds of violence recur, and when they do, Ellis storms through the door in a furious mood. Stan tries to assist Joe, but Joe kills Ellis by dragging him back into the shed and shutting the door. Stan freaks out and locks the door with the dog chain while his grandfather's blood seeps beneath the wood. Then, despite being forbidden from doing so normally, he dashes back to the home and sips Ellis's beer. He thinks about calling the police, but since he's already on probation and fears they'll hold him accountable, he decides against it and instead focuses on properly closing the cabin to keep Joe from escaping and hurting anybody else. Someone tries to open Stan's bedroom door that evening. Stan comes out of his room thinking it might be Ellis, but there's nothing in the hallway. He hears Ellis whispering his name while the power is out. Ellis calling his name from behind him startles him as he rushes to check on his grandfather's room. But everyone has returned to normal. Ellis seeks the whispers, which are now coming from downstairs, until he discovers the shed glowing and the voice growing softer. Before the youngster wakes up in his bed, he hears a voice telling him that Stan wanted him dead as he prepares to open the shed. When Roxy tries to speak with Stan the following day at school, Marble interrupts her and asks for help with her schoolwork. Roxy acknowledges that Stan disapproves of Marble's actions and that she is only dating him in order to get through the past year without being bothered. Stan believes that these choices will follow her throughout her entire life and don't stop at high school. Then he tries to tell Ellis what occurred, but Dahmer interrupts them, which irritates Stan and makes him go by himself. The gang starts making fun of Dahmer as he exits the school, and he responds by giving them the finger. Enraged, the three begin pursuing him into the forest. Stan is at home when he hears the shed door sway and reaches for a bat before approaching. Joe buries a hole in the door and yanks Stan by the neck, revealing his hideous face to Stan. Soon after, the sun begins to burn Joe's hands, making it simple for Stan to escape, and Joe retreats once more. Dahmer shows up at that very moment, bleeding, and yells at Stan to leave him alone. Stan cuts him off to tell him that there's a monster in the shed and that Ellis and his dog are dead. Stan agrees to show Dahmer because he doesn't think he's telling the truth, but not before he snatches some objects to cover the opening. All of a sudden, Dahmer hears his name, and as he approaches, Joe is standing at the entrance. Dahmer assists Stan in closing the hole as he hurries to cover it right away. After that, Dahmer becomes ecstatic because he believes they can use the monster to kill the gang, but Stan stops him from killing anyone because he believes it would be too much. Stan watches an ancient vampire movie in bed that night and takes a knife to discover their weaknesses. They will be executed, their black hearts destroyed, and they will be burned with sunshine. A woman emerges from behind a lewd poster on the wall and proceeds to have sex with Stan. However, she bites him and turns into an ugly vampire, causing Stan to wake up. While searching beneath the bed for his shoes, he discovers the vampire once more. However, this is also a nightmare. He rips the poster off the wall out of frustration. Then, he scales the shed and begins making holes in the roof so that Joe can be injured by the sunshine. But there are still enough shadows for him to remain hidden. After that, when Sheriff Dorney visits Stan to inquire about Ellis, Stan responds that he is out, which surprises Dorney because his car is still at the entry. Stan claims he has no idea where Ellis is and puts the responsibility on the elderly man's indiscretions. According to Dorney, the husband went in search of the murderer after the family across the street murdered all of their bunnies, but he never returned. Stan acknowledges Joe when she gives him the guy's photo, but he claims not to have seen him. When Stan is getting ready for school, a suspicious Dorney insists on taking him there and notices Ellis's cane lying on the ground. At school, Roxy is concerned about Stan's injuries, but Marble's offensive sexist remark cuts the moment short once more. Marble tells Stan he can take Roxy after Stan defends her, labeling her sloppy seconds. Stan becomes enraged and begins pounding Marble, throwing him to the ground so he can hit him even more forcefully. A teacher approaches to yank him back and says they're setting up a meeting with Ellis, but they've dispatched Dorney to fetch him because they couldn't locate him on the phone. Stan rushes out of the school to stop her out of fear for the sheriff's life, oblivious to Marble's attempt to pursue him. Dorney rings the doorbell at Ellis's residence, but no one picks up. She investigates after hearing a commotion coming from the shed at that same moment. Something hits the door rather hard, startling her, but then she hears Ellis calling for assistance. She fires at the lock, but Stan appears before she can get it open. He tries to convince her that it's Joe in the shed and not Ellis when Dorney points her gun at him, but she doesn't buy it. After that, she opens the door to help Ellis, but Joe jumps on her. He pulls her arm off and bites her neck before dragging her into the shed to devour her. He then elevates her arm to squander her shots in the air. Even worse, Marble appears out of nowhere and begins abusing Stan. He finishes the job with a few punches and kicks before pulling out his brass knuckles, but he freezes upon hearing a gunshot. It's Dahmer, who pulls Dorney's revolver one more time to force Marble to give up. When Stan tries to soothe him, Dahmer is frightened and threatens to hurt him too if he gets involved. Then he begins to belittle Marble, making him acknowledge that he is a chicken before putting him in the shed. Once more, Marble travels regularly despite Stan's warnings being disregarded. However, when he notices Dorney's arm on the ground, he becomes frightened. Marble begins to apologize and accept responsibility for all of the incidents that occur at school. However, Dahmer orders him to go into the shed. They soon hear the sounds of Marble being fatally attacked. Stan becomes enraged and begins battling Dahmer for the rifle while yelling at him. But Marble's cry diverts Stan, and Dahmer strikes him with the gun, knocking him unconscious. Stan is woken up by Roxy shortly after. The shed door is open, and Stan is nowhere to be found. Roxy claims she didn't see anyone nearby and becomes alarmed upon seeing the arm on the ground. Stan then goes into the shed to look around and discovers Marble's brass knuckles on the ground. He spots Marble standing in the rear shadows, but when his lifeless corpse collapses, it becomes clear that Dahmer is now a vampire. Dahmer tells Stan that although Joe is gone for the time being, he will return later. As he approaches, he begins to speak in monotone, disregarding the tiny light rays that burn his skin. Roxy screams as soon as she sees him, and Dahmer takes advantage of the commotion to try to attack Stan. Stan responds by stabbing him with a stick and pushing him away with his arm in the light. After that, Stan shuts the shed and gives Roxy a hug, only to have Dahmer suddenly come out. Stan tries to cover him with a sheet, but it's too late as he tries to apologize as the sun burns him to death. After Stan tells Roxy everything, they begin reading aloud for the evening. After placing Stan's body in the shed, they enter the home, lock all of the windows and doors, and light a fire in the hearth. They also collect as many knives as they can find and fashion stakes out of a bunch of wood. Stan finds himself taking the entire situation personally, but Roxy reassures him that it's not his fault, and they kiss. Joe is seen emerging from the jungle at night after hiding beneath some dirt. Pitt and Ozzy arrive at the residence and bang on the door, wanting to know where Marble is. Stan and Roxy attempt to get them to leave. When a shadowy figure emerges, Ozzy becomes alarmed and tries to warn Pitt, who is still fighting. Unexpectedly, an arm extends and pulls Ozzy onto the roof, where his blood spurts. When Pitt eventually realizes it, the couple is forced to admit him. That's when Joe blows up the power box. Stan realizes they forgot to close the attic, but he still believes they should be safe there, because they've sealed all the doors. They divide up the group so that everyone can inspect a different room simultaneously after hearing noises upstairs. Stan discovers Ellis's gun, but doesn't uncover any other intruders. Roxy is anxious and looks under Stan's bed, but she also finds nothing. Pitt, in the meantime, discovers an open window and quickly closes it, failing to notice the shattered glass on the ground. He turns around and is met with the roar of a vampiric Ozzy. Roxy is attacked and carried to the attic at that very moment. Stan rushes to her aid, only to have Ozzy and Pitt, who is now also a vampire, block his path. Pitt shatters the door with an axe as a terrified Stan rushes into a room and locks the door with a chair to check for gunshots. Stan puts the loaded gun in Pitt's mouth and simultaneously fires shots at the two vampires. Roxy is about to be thrashed by Joe in the attic until Stan stops him. He fires first, wounding Joe's arm, but Joe moves quickly and pulls the gun away from him before he can shoot again. After that, Stan strikes Joe in the shoulder with the axe, only to be ejected. After taking out the axe, Joe leaps on Stan to begin strangling him, but Roxy takes the gun and shoots Joe as Stan falls to the ground. Joe only gets facial injuries from the shooting, and the gun is now empty. Joe is about to attack Roxy when Stan yells at him and throws the knife he left earlier, but Joe avoids it and Rosie is hit by the knife instead. When Joe tries to choke Stan once again, Roxy gets her hands on the axe and quickly chops off Joe's head. After everything is over, the couple places everybody in the shed and ignites a fire. When they awaken in the automobile in the morning, they discover they forgot to lock the trunk, which is accessible since something is moving to open it. Movie ends here. Thanks for watching.